Hello students, I just wanted to create this short video on abstract photography just to give you some examples and ideas of things that you can be looking at when you're looking for objects to take abstract photos of. Things that we want to look at is scale of an object. So a lot of times we want to zoom into an object. Also there's lighting. Lighting is very important. Without lighting we wouldn't be able to see the different types of texture that we're looking for in many abstract photos. Another thing that we can do is motion and blur. Sometimes you will see this in an example would be photos of a carnival where the lights are showing a motion blur. Things that we want to think about are the elements and principles of art, and some of the things that we look at, and those two things are texture, pattern, reflection, or transparency. We want to look for lines, and a lot of times we want to look for different variations in color. These mostly are going to be, actually all of these are going to be black and white pictures, but I just want to show you again some examples. So first of all, we can zoom in on everyday objects that have contrast and then blur them. And so you can use your camera lens, and when you're zooming into something, you can actually put it on manual focus and blur the image a little bit. You could also set your focus and then pull your camera back or move it forward to get that same blur effect. Here, it's almost a guessing game with a lot of abstract pictures where you're not always exactly sure what you're seeing, but you almost can always guarantee that you're going to see some type of repetition of shape or pattern or line or an artistic element. Close-ups and zooming in, again, depending on how close we can get to an object, we can really change the perspective of what the person is seeing or what they believe that they're seeing within a picture. Here's a really nice one. They've used a vignette around the outside edge to sort of do that dark halo effect. And then we have the repetition and lines of the bicycle wheel here. It also shows direction, so we can see where those lines sort of come in and they pull your eye over to the left. As far as rule of thirds go, it's not exactly rule of thirds here, but you can tell where the image, where it's offset, it makes it quite a bit more interesting. Search for repetitive textures and patterns. So if you look around you, even where you're at right now, you're probably going to see things that repeat, or there's lines that repeat, or textures, whether it's pattern on the wall, on the ceiling, carpet, depending on where you're at. Like I said, out in nature, once you start looking, you'll be able to see plenty of examples. This here, again, is a close-up zoom. I do not know exactly what this is myself, but to me is what it looks like is black glaze on like a ceramic pot. But we don't always need to be able to identify what the object is. Part of the beauty of an abstract picture is that you're looking at the shape and form and textures and the elements and principles of art and how they're balanced within the picture in order to create a piece of artistic artwork. Here we have simple features, which are just rocks, but changing the type of textures that we might be able to see in the same type of object. So you might have, two different types of wood. You have maybe the outside grain of the wood or the bark mixed up with the inside grain texture. Here we have a couple different styles of rocks where again, they're using the rule of thirds. If we look at the sort of oval or round rocks off to the left bottom half, you can see how those vary from the other rocks that carry the eye, up and to the left. And so mixing different types of textures or shapes together can also create interesting compositions. Here's a basic, just simple bike chain and the gears that it's wrapped around. Again, everyday objects, but we're taking the time to look at them differently. These photos are all going to be black and white, and so adjusting your contrast on your camera or afterwards in Photoshop can really make different parts of the object stand out and look more interesting. Here's again, well, the example of the different types of wood texture. We have the wood texture that's underneath, and then we have the bark that's been burnt at the top of the layer. And so just the juxtapose, or the difference between the lights and the darks, and more of a soft texture and more of a rough texture, can make this image more interesting. Reflections, they are almost everywhere around us, and depending on how we focus on them, we can make interesting compositions. I really like this picture because it's basically two pictures in one. We're able to identify the eye, but then the other part where it's the reflection in the eye, we can't necessarily see what's happening. It might look like part of an old structure, industrial type of structure that that is reflected within the eye. And so using reflective surfaces, we can actually capture maybe one or two images, or even more, depending on how many reflective surfaces we have. Contrast is really important. Here we have nice different shapes or shades of value. We have, where I can see down on the bottom left hand side, we have a value of probably 10 if you were going on a scale of 1 to 10, and then that emphasis right in the middle of the picture where we almost get that value scale of 1, and then all of the different textures that we can see, whether it's smooth lighting where it's a gradual gradation from one side to the other, or if it's up at the top where it looks like it's a really rough surface. But again, we wouldn't be able to see that rough surface unless we concentrate on light. So sometimes setting an abstract portrait, or not portrait, excuse me, an abstract picture setting, is that we really want to look at using our own light or natural light, but maybe getting a different angle of the object in order to make those different textures appear. This is a good example of that. If the light wasn't at the end of this tunnel or tube, the picture is not going to show us all those repetitive patterns and those repetitive values that we see through the tube here. And so again, if you were setting up this image, maybe you might want to tilt your camera a different way, or you might even have to look at where the light source is on the other side and change that light source in order to be able to capture the texture within the image. This one's really great. Again, it's all about the lighting. If the lighting wasn't hitting it the way it is here, it wouldn't look, you wouldn't have those high contrasts of the lights and the darks together. Also, if you look at this picture and try to focus in one section, it's almost like all the different shapes and lines make your eyes travel around the picture. You don't really focus on one section. You start to look at one section and then your eye sort of wanders over to another because there's so many interesting shapes and patterns. Here's more reflective surfaces. This is actually a glass blown sphere with air bubbles inside. And because of the reflective qualities that you can find within a sphere or prism kind of shape, then you can see that those shapes or patterns are going to be replicated over and over each time you see the reflection happen. Here's some simple, it looks like grass sort of flowing or blowing across the image here. Again, I'm not sure exactly if it's grass or another type of texture or substance material, but it's very interesting in the way that the composition is set up. Here's an example where it's one type of texture, but because the texture is moved into different angles and there's different lighting on each individual one, it makes it, there's a nice contrast that carries your eye across the picture. We start down at the bottom where the main emphasis is the part of the abstract photo that is in focus, and so we tend to look at that first, and then our eyes sort of go around and look at the other objects that are or the other textures that are there that are very similar, if not the same. But because of the focus being used here, we have all these different types of textures or values within the picture. It can really change how you look at a picture by the angle that you take the picture at. Here we have, if you look at this picture, it's a staircase with a railing. Our eye tends to look at maybe the center, where the light is, the dark steps, and these lines make our eyes tend to go up and to the left. But if we were to flip this picture around, our eyes go down into the lighted area more to the right bottom. And so you can switch pictures around from this to this, and just in those two pictures you can see that the composition changes just the way that the objects are stacked. Here we have reflective window surface. Again, we're looking at reflections here, but we're also looking at shapes in this photo. We're also looking at lines. We're also looking at a vanishing point. So all of those mixed together create interest, and it also helps guide our eyes around the image itself. Here there's the same image flipped the other direction. So now our eyes tend to go down towards the bottom of the picture, where in the previous picture our eyes tended to start maybe at the bottom and guide up towards the top. So that's the difference between those two there. Then we can also flip it, and this one guides our eyes over to the left hand side because of the vanishing points. It's very interesting just thinking about the way that you can turn your camera in order to get a different perspective, or once you have taken the picture you can rotate it or crop it to make it look that much more interesting. So try, you can try straight on, you can try looking down, looking up, just try other perspectives and viewpoints. But in all of these, remember that you want to incorporate your compositional techniques that you've learned so far. This one's nice. It's I don't know if you'd necessarily call it a reflective surface. It is a window, but we can see that there's a plane of vision there where the raindrops are clinging to the window. And if you look at those raindrops, you can even tell that the ones down on the lower left-hand side have more of a darker image where they're reflecting the tree outside, or if we go up to the upper right-hand side, you don't see so much of that reflection within the raindrops. This has always been this has always just been one of my favorite abstract designs, as far as being able to find a location where you can find so many different types of lines going in different directions and patterns. We have the pattern that's created by the railing, the arm railing on the benches here that go slowly recede back into the back. You also have the lines that are on the walls in the marble pattern there. If you look at the reflection in the marble on the wall, you can also see where the lights from the ceiling are reflected going back. Then if we look at the texture down below, it's interesting too, because depending on which angle you look at it, you can see that those dots create an implied line. And the implied line not only goes on the left-hand side, kind of straight back, but if you look over on the left-hand side, it goes back and up and wraps around. And so overall, I think it's just really interesting, all the shapes and patterns and textures that are within this picture, and it also incorporates the reflective quality within each parts of the material, whether it's the stainless steel or chrome on the bench, or the marble reflecting the lights back behind. What is this? This is an abstract picture where it's open to your own interpretation, where the artist, when they took the photo or manipulated the photo, definitely wanted you to not be able to identify the object, and wanted the actual textures and shapes and elements of art to create the picture itself. Again, shooting scenes in abstract ways. So here's the same photo 3 times, but just flipped different directions. Okay, again, repetitive lines, shapes, values. This is kind of abstract, but you can zoom in. So if you look at this picture here, we can tell that it's a beach scene with some shells and some driftwood. It's a nice shadow that we see coming across, the light reflecting on the left, but how can we change that to make it more abstract? So here's another one. Here's some pipes hanging up in a shop, but how can we change it, or what would you do in order to get more of an abstract image here? Here we could zoom in, so we're not able to easily identify what we're seeing, but we're looking more at the shapes and the objects within the abstract image itself. This is abstract. How could you make it more abstract? Let me go back to that one. How could you make this more abstract? So there's definitely some interesting qualities, art elements within this picture. There's different shapes and reflections and change in value. But how would you take your camera and do maybe a different angle? Maybe it's coming all the way up above the water drain, or maybe it's going all the way down to like a worm's eye view of the object of the different objects themselves in order to create interest. How can you make this shot more abstract? So we've already gone over some of this. We could change the direction of it. We could zoom in. We could crop to a certain area. Okay. Change your viewpoint and capture a more abstract shot. Okay, this one, repetitive architecture, depending on the angle that you get, can create really interesting abstract shots. So before we looked at the windows and the bench and reflective surfaces, but a lot of times there's architectural elements that repeat, and depending on where you take that picture, there's a lot of times that the lighting itself can really create interest. Okay, we've talked about the use of light. This one's interesting here because the negative space that's around the image here, or the dark area, sort of frames in what we can see of parts of a texture. And again, there's just not enough there that we can identify it as maybe a concrete wall or anything like that, but we can look at it, and it's open to our own